had the most promise for future water for our vicinity. These included a full development of Anchorage wells, an off-stream storage possibility along Ship Creek, the development of wells in the Eagle River area, the recharge withdrawal project associated with the Ship Creek supply, diversion of water from the Eklutna River, our reservoir, and finally the construction of dams at two possible sites on Ship Creek. Initially, the study concentrated itself on the Ship Creek area. I think all of us at one time have envisioned that because of the great amount of water that is available on Ship Creek, the possible solution to our needs would be to build dams at two logical sites along Ship Creek. Extensive testing was done in this area, and following the analysis of this testing, it was determined that building a dam at either site on Ship Creek was just not economically feasible. Extensive glacial deposits have occurred at the two dam sites, which would make the construction of a dam prohibitive. Instead of a project then using a single source of supply, the consultants developed a project that would envision the use of several types of supply that included the utilization of well supplies in the Anchorage Bowl to their maximum sustainable capability, to the extent that they would continually be recharged each year and no permanent drawdown would be the result of its use. Number two, the expansion of the city water treatment plant to provide 24 million gallons per day maximum capacity as compared to its present 10.5 million gallons per day, with additional modifications to ultimately expand the plant to 36 million gallons per day. Third, the construction of a 36-inch raw water transmission line from the Ship Creek intake to the existing water treatment plant. Fourth, recommended increased emphasis upon heating surface supplies, metering, and other water conservation measures to cut down on the use of water. The city is presently constructing a gas turbine installation near the water treatment plant, and we will allow or construct a heat recovery system that will allow waste heat from the turbine to be used in heating the cold winter water from Ship Creek. Fifth, modifications to the Ship Creek diversion structure will be required to provide for increased capacity needs. And finally, we will be required to develop a series of staged off-stream storage areas along Ship Creek just above the existing city water treatment plant, together with related transmission lines and pumping stations. Or in other words, we will not be able to build a dam and impound a reservoir, but we will be able to dig lakes and allow the water to run into these areas and also recharge as well as to serve the plant for future water needs. These, of course, have other possibilities for recreation areas and perhaps many, many others. In association with off-stream storage, the study recommends the construction of several wells adjacent to these off-stream storage ponds, so that after a time of testing, it may very well be possible that we won't have to build as large a treatment plant as we envision if we'll be able to pick up the water downstream from the storage pond areas where it percolates down into the groundwater and does its own treating, so to speak. Then we won't have to do this treating through a water treatment plant. Estimated expenditures for this development in $74 is approximately $36 million. One major conclusion presented in the study is that the Anchorage Bowl wells, along with Ship Creek and Campbell Creek supplies, will not meet our requirements past the year 2000. At that time, we'll have to go to a source outside of the area. Right now, it looks like the best possibility would be the development of wells in Eagle River, perhaps even a Eklutna, but that's something that can be studied between now and that time. In addition, for conservation of water, the study recommends, and to meet our needs, the study recommends that the USGS recharge and well studies be continued and expanded, that efforts be stepped up by the utilities to reduce per capita consumption of water. And of course, we do have the highest per capita consumption of water, I guess, of any city in the United States. And one of the primary reasons for this, of course, is that you just leave your water running during the winter to avoid freeze-ups. Metering will have an effect upon reducing consumption in the future. However, we think we'll need to devise some system of heating the water first to assure our citizens that if they leave that tap off, their service will not freeze. Otherwise, metering will have little advantage to us. Engineering soil studies should be continued to confirm and quantify the usable fill material available from the excavation of the off-stream storage reservoirs. And by this means, we do have a considerable amount of lead time to develop these off-stream storage reservoirs. And it may very well be, and the location of these reservoirs are in a good gravel deposit, and perhaps the most economical approach might be to allow these sites to be utilized for gravel sources within the next many years, thereby allowing them to be dug without cost to the citizens, and allow the material itself to be used in other construction projects. And then finally, a test well drilling program has to be initiated in the Eagle River area. This completes my section of the program. We'll be glad to try to answer any questions at the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker.
Thank you, Lydia. Everyone seems to be talking about history, and it occurred to me as Lydia was talking about Plato that marvelous book, The Source, if James Michener was right, and I think he was, the thing that stuck out in that book was that the man who dug that tunnel all the way down to the water source, a hidden water source, I might say, because if they couldn't get water into the city, of course the city would be destroyed. And we don't have to fight off the warring tribes outside the city right now, but I think water remains as important as it was in those days. I was asked to come, I believe, to tell you what we are doing in the borough. Rather than talk about history, I'll talk about what we're doing. We have the power of planning, parks and recreation, sewers and drainage, solid waste disposal, and health. And all of those relate to water. Planning, of course, being a major power, we do have the responsibility to look at the overall picture in this area. The topics I'd like to just touch on briefly, I think you people don't want to be talked at all morning, is water supply, and I think Herman's done a good job showing where we are today. Floodplain management, planning and zoning, as water affects that. Parks and recreational programs, sanitary sewer system, including wastewater treatment, storm drainage, and the solid waste program. In the water supply management, the borough has become concerned over the lack of management for water supply for the borough residents as a whole. The City of Anchorage is developing a supply of water for their customers which will be sufficient for future years. However, no agency is responsible for water supply for the borough as a whole. The Eagle River residents, as an example, are especially hard-pressed to find an agency, except for the borough, who is willing or capable of providing water to meet their existing needs, let alone the future requirements of the Eagle River area. A program which the borough is interested in sponsoring is an urban study. This program, which is under the direction of the Corps of Engineers and is completely funded by the federal government, involves the study of all water resources for urban areas. Every state in the Union now has at least one such study going, with the exception of Alaska, and we are attempting to have such a program begun for the Anchorage area. Special emphasis would be placed upon water source development, storm drainage planning, wastewater disposal practices, and recreational uses of water. The study would be a 3-year study, and when completed would provide the borough with a water management plan which could be used for future years as well as present-day requirements. Obviously, we would coordinate with what the city has done to date. On floodplain management, although the Corps of Engineers is more concerned with the floodplains are defined by the Corps of Engineers, and after definition, the local governments are responsible for passing ordinances prohibiting any development which would add to the flood danger or area in the future. Floodplain management then becomes a coordinated effort of local government units and federal and state agencies. If properly administered, the probability of damaging floods can be reduced considerably, if not entirely eliminated. In the field of planning and zoning, You may have read our recent zoning on the hillside, and I think that is a prime example of the use of water. I believe that to a large extent the zoning up there was done primarily based on water or the lack thereof and drainage problems. I think, frankly, in this area, as far as planning and zoning is concerned, that water, along with the economic impact of zoning, the economic impact, I might say, on government spending of subdivisions in rural areas are the two most important things we have to consider. In Parks and Recreation, we have a Greenbelt program, and as you know, the more successful we become on that Greenbelt program, the more successful we'll be in preserving the water we now have. And we're working very hard on that, and I think we only have to look, in spite of the work that was done in the past, you have to look at Fish Creek to see what can happen to a creek if it isn't preserved. And we may be able to back up on Fish Creek, but I think we certainly shouldn't allow that to happen to the other stream beds. Sanitary sewer system, including wastewater treatment. No one can doubt that the sanitary sewer system in the bowl area has contributed significantly to the betterment of water quality in the bowl. Both surface water and groundwater sources were being seriously polluted by uncontrolled discharges of raw or improperly treated sewage before the area-wide sewage treatment system was initiated. Development of the Muldoon area was at a virtual standstill before sewer construction due to serious groundwater pollution by improperly operating septic tank systems. Wells were contaminated and streams polluted. The completion of the Point Woronzof treatment plant and the elimination of all raw sewage discharges into the area, streams, and Cook Inlet has been the single most beneficial water quality milepost which has been accomplished today in the Anchorage area, in my opinion. In future years, the sewage system will be an accepted function of the community, and improving other factors of water pollution will be utmost in the Anchoragites' eyes. However, without the sewerage system, no other factors would be worth considering. Consideration is now being given to using the effluent from the treatment plant as a means for recharging the groundwater table in certain areas of the bowl. If this proves feasible, the 20 million gallons of wastewater flowing through the plant daily will be used for worthwhile means instead of wasting it in Cook Inlet. It is believed that recharge of the area near Point Woronzof would reduce the intrusion of salt water into the groundwater and thus considerably increase the amount of groundwater available for use in the Anchorage area. As far as storm drainage is concerned, although the Anchorage area is in an arid climate, storm drainage is a serious pollutant of our lakes and streams in the area and can be a damaging force in developed areas if not properly handled. At present, both the city and the borough control their own storm drain systems. There is no overall storm drainage plan in the bowl area, although one is definitely needed. It is hoped that the urban study that I mentioned earlier can provide such a plan, but in order to work, it would require a great deal of coordination between the city and borough, and I expect that to happen. As far as solid wastes are concerned, the sanitary landfill today is the only available method for disposing of our waste. Various waste processing systems are available whereby the waste volume is reduced prior to final disposal in the sanitary landfill. Proper site selection is the most important step towards establishing an acceptable sanitary landfill operation. When locating sanitary landfill sites, the primary concern should be to keep the potential contamination of groundwaters and surface waters at a minimum, for pollution does result from all types of waste disposal systems which utilize the land. The Greater Anchorage Borough Department of Public Works Solid Waste Management Division, in cooperation with the USGS, has embarked upon a water quality hydrogeologic investigation of 2 existing solid waste disposal facilities located within the area in order to determine the necessary criteria. In order to develop the necessary criteria for for selecting future solid waste disposal sites, additional monitoring wells will be required, which will permit deeper sampling and analysis of groundwaters to determine the vertical extent of contamination, the attenuation rates of contaminants by various sediment types, and the direction and rate of groundwater movement. This work is now being programmed for the spring, summer, and fall of 1974. I think I could go on here, Lydia, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jack. I think that
Thank you, Lydia. I believe I'd like to start off with sort of bringing together some things that have already been mentioned. First of all, what are we talking about? We're talking about a watershed. Every square inch of this state is part of some watershed. So when we talk about management, we're talking about statewide management. Now this could run all the way from the watershed of the Yukon River down to something like the watershed of Chester Creek. It involves from the tops of the mountains to the sea. And of course, if you look at any one unit, a drainage area or watershed, you'll find that parts of that area are usable only for one thing. Other parts of the area could be usable for many things. For instance, I believe you'll agree that the tops of the mountains might be usable for skiing, but usually we just leave the snow alone and let it run off when it melts. There are some areas, for instance, in the Chester Creek watershed that should be used only for retention areas or recharge areas. We're involving the use of these sometimes in our development, and we should really look at it. But management, as I say, involves every bit of that watershed area. And once you do that and look at it as a whole piece, you get into a new problem. You find that different parts of it are owned by different people. The city controls part of Chester Creek. The borough controls another part. The military controls a piece. Bureau of Land Management controls a piece. And that immediately brings us to the problem of who has the final say or who is going to set the guidelines. And there is our real problem. We have to get together, decide what we're going to plan for and how we're going to plan for it. Now, the Corps of Engineers has an interested role primarily. We've been involved in Alaska. I believe we're almost the first federal agency up here in the terms of military personnel who cut trails, surveyed, even you could say explored. And we've been here ever since. Sometimes you haven't been exactly happy with what we've done, and other times you've thanked us. I would like to straighten one thing out, though, as far as the Corps is concerned. We do not look for our own jobs. You, the people, tell us what to do through your congressman. For instance, Anchorage would like a small boat harbor. We don't decide that they will or won't. Congress gives us the money through actions of the congressman from Alaska to study the possibilities of a small boat harbor. We make recommendations back to Congress, whether it would be feasible or not, and primarily right now it's on the basis of economics. That mood may change very soon to where the Congress looks more towards the social aspects, the environmental aspects of any one project. But in terms of watershed management, the Corps is interested on the basis of our water resources and also on the basis of the health and welfare of the populace. We do all sorts of studies. We've done many studies in the state of Alaska on the water resources of this state. Usually they've been on a basin-wide concept, what we call comprehensive planning. We haven't got down to the details yet, but sooner or later we'll have to. We also do some work now that Mayor Roderick mentioned, floodplain management services. This doesn't involve the entire watershed, but it does involve the area where floods occur. And strangely enough, people love to build where the floods will occur. So we now have the ability to make what we call floodplain information reports. And all these do is tell the governing body, here is your problem. Now what are you going to do to solve it? So far for the borough, we've made one for Chester Creek, Campbell Creek, Ship Creek, Fish Creek, Glacier Creek, Rabbit Creek. We're completing one right now on Peters Creek. Now, as I say, we have told the borough, here's your problem. It's up to you to try to solve it. But at the same time, we'll also provide the technical expertise, if you want us to help you solve the problem. The floodplain management program is, in a way, an extension of any governing body's arm. It takes advantage of the expertise that the Corps of Engineers has, and if used properly, can provide safe areas of construction or safe construction. The mayor mentioned that there would be a restriction in building in certain flood hazard areas. We don't quite go that far. We say if you do know there is a flood hazard and you want to build there, do so safely. Which leads us to the fact that regardless of who screams on one side or the other about development, conservation, or what have you, the people themselves are going to demand certain things. We in the Corps believe that if the demand is there, we should plan as wisely as possible to combine what the people want with the needs of the world. And this, I believe, is a real, honest, logical approach to the whole problem. We know that there are some things that can't be done with the environment as we see it. But we also know that people are going to continue to demand that they have their wants satisfied. So a blending of the two is almost a necessity. And the people must realize that they can't have everything they want. At the same time, the world must realize that man is living on it and is going to affect it one way or another. The mayor also mentioned urban studies. This is a relatively new field for the Corps of Engineers. We will, if requested, take the entire borough and look at it as a continuous whole piece. Examine the problem of water from the time it falls on the tops of the mountains till it reaches the sea. And this will include all those areas that the mayor mentioned: water treatment, sewage, storm drainage, protection of the flood hazard areas, and so on. We will very probably in this type of study come up with some recommendations. At the same time, I would like to emphasize the Corps has no regulatory authority in these areas. All we can do is recommend, so that maybe you would like what we say, maybe you wouldn't. But we will put the best we have into studying these things and give you our best recommendations. I'd like to point out a few things that have happened, and I'm not blaming Mayor Roderick or George Sullivan for them. But if you want to see what poor management does, walk Chester Creek. This is one of those areas that's controlled by various governing bodies. And the city at the present time has started to make a green belt down near the mouth. It's made a small lake there which will be usable for recreation. And part of Chester Creek goes through this area right here. It isn't very much in its natural state through here. But just a little further to the east of us is a development area. Very heavily developed. And some of the portions of the creek have been changed so that it's nothing more than a ditch now. Homes are right on its banks. One area in College Gate East, number 3, redesigned the creek so that the stream itself, or the ditch that's now there, will carry the 100-year storm or flood within the stream banks. This means that theoretically homes can be built along the banks and will be safe. But right today, that stream is bank full of ice. So man can't solve all the problems all the time. And glaciation is a very bad problem when you try to develop close to the streams. Mayor Roderick mentioned another stream that used to be a nice one, Fish Creek. It starts right here in this area. That is, it used to. It flowed across where Lake Otis and the medical center is now, and then on across another street, and down across the new highway, and so on down to the inlet. At the present time, Lake Otis cuts it off completely. There's no way for the water to get through. And there are at least 3 other places where it used to run that the crossings have been completely eliminated. Under the new highway, you can see a lake every spring to the east side of the highway. One of the landowners and developers between the old and the new highway once called me and said, "I would like to have you talk to my lawyer. People are causing floodwaters on me from Fish Creek." And he was complaining about someone to the west of the old Seward Highway. I went out and examined it and found that his flooding was very simple. He had put in about a 12-inch culvert, filled over it, the culvert had plugged, and the water trying to get through where it used to go was now going across his ground. Now, this is the sort of thing I mean when you take nature and try to bend it to your own personal uses. It won't work. You've got to learn to live with nature. And I see that if we are going to have any questions, I better shut up. So if you have any, I'd be very happy to answer them or try to, and we'll let Lydia go from here.